All right, Libertarian Party debate.
Lot of other victories we can win in this party with a vibrant and energetic presidential campaign. We can have wins at ballot access in states where we can make it easier for new libertarians to be able to run for office. We can win major party status in states all over the country that open up avenues that parties don't currently have. And most importantly, we can identify winnable libertarian races all over the country, and our presidential candidate can be out there with the energy and enthusiasm needed to support these winnable races so we can actually have real libertarian victories and start winning from the ground up. Because change begins at the grassroots, and our presidential campaign needs to reflect that. I have the energy, the enthusiasm, and the ability to communicate our values in a way that reaches out to people who are not yet libertarian voters, who will become libertarian voters. And that's why I want to be our nominee. It's not because I don't think don't have great libertarians up here beside me. We do. I just think I'm the best in 2024 to communicate our values forward so we can have millions of new libertarian voters and many libertarian victories all over the country. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Rechtenwald, and I'm running for president as a libertarian to wreck the regime. And what do I mean by that? I mean wresting power from the central government, investing in the people at the local level. I mean winning liberty at the local level. I mean taking away state power at the local level. I mean challenging the monopoly over money by using alternative parallel currencies at the local level and across localities. I'm talking about undoing the monopoly over media, over...
All right, this guy's already way better than the first guy because he's at least bringing up policy.
over voting and everything else. So in other words, what I'm doing is wrecking the regime by bringing people into the party, bringing new voters in, bringing new people to run at the local level, and wreck the regime. This is not about Michael Rechtenwald riding into D.C. like a white knight and exacting these top-down reforms. This will never happen, and it will never work. What is really possible...
There's also this tweet, not a tweet, but something from his getter. Anyway, he said, Trump is giving a world historic speech right now. It's almost over. It was so moving, I'm actually crying. It's hard to imagine supporting anybody who was moved to tears by a Trump speech.
Take control of the local level and wreck the regime. Thank you.
Apparently this guy's got...
Hello, my name's Joshua Smith.
Apparently that last guy, Reckenwald, has some Mises Caucus support.
Because I want to for my children and my community that I live in currently. That's my why. What I hope to accomplish by running for president is several things. I'd love to see a 50-state media tour where we get to put libertarian principles at the forefront of the corporate news media and all the big podcasts. I'd like to double Harry Brown's efforts from 2000 and more than double the party. I think that membership has dwindled and it's hurting us seriously, terribly as a party. I'd love to help the down ballot candidates. As somebody who's worked with hundreds of candidates across the country, I think that I'm uniquely positioned to do that. I think it's one of the most important things for any presidential candidate up here today to be doing is to make sure that in 2024 we're using our platform to help down ballot candidates win where we can make the most difference at the local and state level. I hope that this candidacy is able to move the Overton window in the United States. We are at a point that is almost we're not able to come back from. So I hope that you guys will give me your support in May and go to joshuasmith2024.com to check out more. Thanks.
All right, Joshua, not bad.
I don't think there is a single syllable that you heard just now that any of us would disagree with. My name is Mike Tremont. I'm running a very different type of campaign.
So I actually, I saw this guy debate Vosh. I did a YouTube video on it. Mike Tremont, former economist and cop.
Inside this party in a very different type of campaign than you see from the rest of the candidates. And the reason for that is that this is the campaign that I want you to look at and realize that if you actually want to participate in the disruption of American politics, this is the type of campaign that you need to support. I have been a professional economist for 25 years. My second career in public policy and public service was as a police officer for 11 and a half years on the road from age 49 to 60 in Broward County, Florida. I have been there and I have done that. And I am uniquely positioned with my campaign and with my candidacy to clear the threshold that the American people expect, that donors expect, that the media expects to be cleared by a candidate who's actually going to participate in the process. I look forward to answering your questions and showing you why this is the campaign that I think you'll be proud to support.
I'm running for president because I want to be free. It's that simple. I want to live in a free society at least one day before I pass from this life. And that's one of my beefs with the reform message that has become dominant in the Libertarian Party. It cannot lead to freedom. All it can...
What, this guy didn't even bother to show up?
Much like slavery reform could not lead to freedom for slaves. To achieve freedom, we have to make the principled case for freedom. The second reason is I want to bring an end to the federal killing machine. Invasions, occupations, state-sponsored assassinations, sanctions, embargoes, the drug war, and of course America's socialist system of immigration controls, and the police state along the border that kills thousands of people. Unfortunately, all of my opponents in this
Nice substantive policy. I wish the other candidates were making statements like that.
race support that immigration socialism. But it is only the principled case that this party has stood for 50 years in favor of open borders that can resolve this part of the killing machine of the federal government. I'm running for president because I want to be free and because I want to end the federal killing machine.
I'm Lars Mapstead, and I'm running for president to unrig the system. The system is rigged, folks. The economy is rigged. The Federal Reserve has printed $33 trillion that has been stolen from the American people. The IRS is a corrupt mechanism for stealing from the American people, especially payroll taxes, which steal from the working class. I'm running to unrig our election system. It's completely broken. Especially if you're a libertarian, you understand that ballot access, gerrymandering, and winner-take-all states completely rig the system so that it's impossible for anybody to run and compete against a duopoly. I'm implementing the Voters' Bill of Rights to level the playing field and make things fair and transparent for all Americans. I'm running
Lots of good choices in this field.
the system. I'm tired of people going to jail for victimless crime. I'm tired of people going to jail for choosing to use marijuana if they like to. I'm tired of the criminal justice system treating police as different.
That's a little milquetoast. Marijuana, I mean, it's legalized in a bunch of states already. You could go stronger.
Things. So I'm running to unrig the system. Lars24.com. Thank you.
Our first set of questions goes to taxation. I begin with Mr. Mapstead. Mr. Mapstead, you have said that our current federal income tax penalizes the poor and that you would replace it with a sales tax. But according to Congressional Budget Office figures, under the current federal income tax system, the poor...
Ooh, I don't like replacing the income tax with a sales tax. Just get rid of it. Replace it with nothing. Much better.
in income tax credits more than they pay in taxes. That is, they are...
I also don't think this is, like, you portray somebody who's a net tax consumer, somebody who has more money spent on them by the state or ostensibly spent on them than they pay in taxes, as if they're a winner from the system. That's not necessarily true. In fact, depending on the spending, I would say that's seldom true. The reason why is that the utility of a dollar that you're taxed is substantially higher than a utility of a dollar that's spent on you. Now, that's not true in the case of direct transfer payments like Social Security or child care benefit, but a lot of the money that gets spent in the name of the poor just goes to the machinery of the bureaucracy itself.
net recipients of the federal income tax system. Under your proposed sales tax system, the poor will be net payers. Please explain how your sales tax would benefit the poor. You have 90 seconds to respond.
Thank you very much. So the sales tax that I'm proposing is actually a bill that's been before Congress for 20 years. It's the fair tax. You might have heard it under Gary Johnson. There's built-in pieces to help the poor. Essentially, under the fair tax law, anyone who makes under $40,000 a year will not be paying any kind of tax at all, because there is a prebate built in that goes to cover all the tax under $40,000. And the amount of money that is spent is basically you get to keep 100% of your paycheck. It eliminates the payroll tax, so you have a lot of money in your pocket to spend on things that you really care about. And also all used goods are not taxed, so we can go to a more.
So, assuming a $40,000 income and a sales tax rate of 25%, that would be like a $10,000 rebate check from the government.
Or useful economy and recycle things, which is good for.
So this is actually just straight dishonesty from the candidate. For a single person, the monthly prebate would be $226, regardless of their income. With a tax rate of 30%, which is what the fair tax proposes, on an income of $40,000, they would pay $10,000 in tax. It's only if you have 7 children that you get the full $10,000, $9,405, or if you have a spouse, then you would get $12,000. Another problem here is that while this is means tested to income, the prebate, it's not means tested to wealth. So, and this is a problem we have in Canada with our GST rebates, is that there is an element of redistribution from people who are relatively poor to people who are relatively rich.
And it helps, message to the left. And so this system is actually better than what we have right now, because we spend $2 trillion a year on compliance with the tax code.
He's off by a factor of 10 there. Compliance costs look to be around $200 billion. Still a staggering amount, but $2 trillion, I don't think so.
Billion man hours a year with compliance to the tax code, and this gets rid of all that. We can be much more efficient. Imagine if you had an extra week in your life to be efficient, or to take a vacation, or to spend time with your kids and family instead of filling out stupid IRS tax forms. I've been audited multiple times. No one should live under this coercive system. The government uses, and Congress uses, the tax code to hand out favors, these loopholes to bro out corporations, and we need to end this by abolishing the IRS and implementing the fair tax. Thank you.
We have time for opponent responses.
I just wanted to make note, there's no such thing as a fair tax. So what do you have in mind? Why is this fair?
The reality of it is that I would be willing to take whatever we can get towards reducing taxes. If Congress came to me and I'm president and they say, I'm going to cut taxes 20%, you better believe I'm going to take that. Because the amount of tax that we're paying is too much, and if we can reduce that at all, that's great. Thank you very much.
Next question is, you have said that federal revenue should only come from state governments, and even then that state governments should be subject to taxation only to support national defense. What you're proposing is a return, at least fiscally, to the Articles of Confederation. We tried that, and it failed.
Finally, a sufficiently radical transition program.
Why do you think it will work this time? You have 90 seconds.
I appreciate that. The Articles of Confederation failed for a variety of reasons. Yes, that was a challenge, but I don't think that anyone in the room would argue that the system of taxation that we have today is an appropriate one. I believe that the relationship that we have between individuals and the federal government in the United States today is completely inappropriate. Not only does the government express no interest whatsoever in standing up for your civil liberties, the federal government uses you as a revenue source. Anyone here ever been audited? I have. It's not a pleasant experience.
Based.
It is not a fair experience. It is one where the government holds all the cards. You need a state to stand up for your rights. No one else is going to be able to do it for you. You need the state to be the entity that's getting taxed by the federal government. The federal government spends too much money. One of the big reasons it does so is because it has taking it from people like you because we find it impossible to stand up to the government in any real political sense. That's why we need the states to stand instead for us and give pushback to the federal government.
What I hear you saying is that the federal government will turn to the states for its revenue, but the states receive their revenue from their populations. So have you not, in effect, just set up 50 separate IRS offices?
Well, we already have 50 separate IRS offices in the United States today. States today collect revenue from individuals, but states operate pursuant to state legislatures that are much closer to their constituents, politically speaking. You don't need two different layers of government.
Even better, do it at the municipal level.
The same amount of money. What you need is better control at a more decentralized level over the entity that is trying to tax you.
Well, I like the idea. Decentralization is always good. Allow voters to vote with their feet if one state is collecting too much tax.
We're not talking about creating more institutions. They already exist.
All right, this is for Mr. Hornberger. You've argued that we should abolish the income tax in the IRS. Given that 60% of the federal government's revenues come from personal and corporate income taxes, how do you propose to raise the missing $3 trillion?
You eliminate the things that government spends its money on. Of all the candidates in this race, I am the only candidate that says abolish the crown jewel of American socialism, which is Social Security, one of the most destructive government programs that's ever been enacted. Abolish Medicare and Medicaid,
ultra-based,
which destroyed the finest healthcare system in history. Dismantle the national security state and restore a limited government republic to our land.
Hornberger, the firebrand.
When you talk about eliminating these things that are some $4 or $5 trillion out of the federal budget, now you're talking about a minimal government that no longer needs an income tax and can rely on voluntary support instead of these indirect taxes that tax
GoFundMe pages.
The poor like consumption taxes do. So what we need to be talking about is not,
or a light uniform tariff.
Not like Republicans that say, oh, we want to reduce taxes, we want smaller government. We need to be focusing on what government spends its money on and what government should be doing and not doing in order to achieve that free society. And a prerequisite of that is what distinguishes my campaign. I say eliminate American socialism, Medicare, Social Security, the entire welfare state, which these guys here cannot do because they feel that freedom doesn't work. That you just can't eliminate these programs. They
shots fired.
Say because people will die in the streets. Who in the heck's going to vote for a philosophy when its candidate says you can't trust it to work?
Okay, I sense we're at that point where the other candidates are ready to jump in. I see everybody with hands on microphones. As a matter of housekeeping, we're going to get to Social Security very soon.
Okay.
So set that one aside and feel free to have it the rest. Go.
I'm totally for eradicating the IRS and eradicating the income tax entirely. So I don't see where you're getting this from. And we'll keep Social Security and Medicare for the last question, which I also recommended completely axing. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say I very clearly call for the abolition of a lot of these things. I do know that the Mr. Hornberger, the IRS, the president does not have the authority to abolish the IRS, but I have called for a 70% reduction in the workforce, and I have called for the abolition entirely of the income tax and several other taxes. I have called for a use tax, a user fee to fund the federal government. So I have said a lot of the same things as you, sir. Just wanted to make that clear. Do you have a plan for the IRS, knowing that you will not have the power in the executive branch to abolish it?
What's important as a presidential candidate of this party is to tell people what we stand for. Now, we all know that if a Libertarian Party presidential candidate were to be elected, he has to go through the procedure. He has to get Congress to enact a law to repeal the income tax. But that doesn't mean that we cannot stand for for these correct principles so that the American people can understand what a free society is genuinely all about.
Mr. Smith, the next question is for you. You have said that your administration would seek to replace all federal taxes with user fees and to fund national defense via voluntary crowdfunding. To crowdfund just the Department of Defense
Love it.
would require raising from voluntary contributions 12,000 times what the largest ongoing crowdfunding project in history has raised, and to repeat that feat every year. Please explain how you intend to raise from voluntary
This guy's asking the hardball questions.
contributions an amount that is double all charitable giving in the U.S.
First of all, I'd like to preface this by saying we're not going to be spending that much on defense anymore. I mean, if I was the president of the United States of America and America was crazy enough to put me in office and we got there, we're ending the
I don't like that framing.
UMF. We're pulling our troops out of all foreign excursions. We're shutting down military bases around the world, especially the ones that literally border the entire country of Iran and Russia. The spending is going to be reduced to a very small iota of what it has been, and I think that crowdfunding is going to be much smaller than what it would take to continue the U.S. empire war machine that we see today.
Given that Congress, not the president, determines the magnitude of defense spending, and given that defense spending, when it is cut by small percentages, even if we were to cut the Department of Defense by 50%, something that is historically has never come close to, you still need a crowdfunding campaign that's 6,000 times the largest crowdfunding campaign in history. Do you think that this is seriously realistic?
I do. I believe it is. And I think there's enough patriotic Americans that if we had our troops at home, which makes us a much safer nation, by the way, instead of having a large portion of our military abroad, I think that we have enough patriotic Americans in here that care enough about defense to give,
David Friedman also suggested national defense along the model of a nonprofit organization with wide volunteer reservists and then a small cadre of professional soldiers. You would obviously, I mean, you'd be looking at maybe 1% or something like that of the current military spending. It would be radically different.
20, 30, 40, $50 a month, especially if they're not having to pay an income tax. So I 100% believe that this is an honest proposal that can be done in America. Prior to 1913 and the Tax Act, we had a military, we had a government, it operated without a federal income tax. It can be done again, but we need to find some real answers to these questions. And I think that pulling our troops out of these foreign excursions around the world is the answer. And
I think that people underestimate the danger of standing armies. That's really one of the core causes of imperialism, simply the weight of the military machinery itself. So seeing this dramatically reduced spending would be tremendous progress for world peace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Smith, as a libertarian candidate, you of all candidates would take free market principles to heart. And here we have a serious free rider problem. That is, if James is contributing voluntarily to the defense, I get defended even if I don't contribute. Are you now suspending what we understand about economic behavior to claim that your voluntary crowdfunding campaign is going to actually fund the Department of Defense?
Well, I'll tell you this much. There's no more
These guys are asking some great questions.
right whatsoever in the world that says if you're not receiving something in return, then you shouldn't have to pay for it. And that is one of the most basic libertarian principles, right? They should not be extracting our wealth for something that we don't want, we don't use, and the only way to get around that at the federal level is through a user fee. It's the only way. Otherwise, we're going above and beyond our libertarian principles. We're going into tyrannical behavior. We're extracting wealth from people that need it to feed their families. 12% of the population in the United States today is having a problem putting food on the table, and we're worried about sending $200 billion to or $50 billion to over 200 countries around the world every year. It's got to stop, and this is the most free market principle I could come up with when talking about economics as far as the defense state.
I want to reinforce what he's saying, and I would remind everyone in this room that when we were a limited,
Like to a degree, having the military as a nonprofit organization instead of as a market good that is sold helps to eliminate the free rider problem, in that you're not concerned when you're donating to a cause. You're not concerned if somebody else has already donated or not. You're donating because you have that money available and you believe in that cause. So it's true that other people will benefit. There will be positive externalities from Jones contributing to the Army. But how is that any different from the various contributions that people make under the tax system? Except, of course, in this case, without the coercion, without the moral hazard. The Army's still going to have to show that they're spending that money wisely if they want donations to continue. And yeah, probably some people will give more than others. Others might donate charitably in different ways. Still, others might not donate charitably at all. That's just life. It doesn't really matter.
the government operated without an income tax for more than 100 years. And if they could do that.
He's almost right about that. There was an income tax in 1861 during the Civil War. So the first income tax in the United States was instituted shortly before 100 years had gone. It was about 90 years or 85 years since America's founding to the first income tax. That was actually repealed 11 years later, and then there was an income tax in 1913.
They can operate off voluntary funding and user fees like Josh. So I reinforce everything he just said.
Mr. Rechtenwald, you have said that if elected, you would abolish the income tax. It costs more than $6 trillion annually to run the federal government. Even if you manage to convince Congress to cut the federal budget, something that has happened only 3 times since World War II, you'd still need to raise more than $5 trillion. How do you propose to do this without an income tax? And if you propose massive cuts, where will those cuts come from?
We'll start off with the second question. By the way, I'm also a Pittsburgher. I will say this. I would start off with the second question by talking about what I would eliminate. And that is, of course, eventually the Fed, the Federal Reserve, altogether. Of course, they don't really cost
Eventually? Why not immediately?
us money, except that they inflate deflate our dollar to the point where we're living under outrageous inflation. But I would get rid of the IRS, the CIA, the FBI, and the ATF, and several other departments altogether. Then we'll see what.
Just the police? Why not the Department of Education? Why not HUD?
Kind of money we really need to run this government. We're really talking hypothesis here, and these are kind of policy minutia statements when this is not really what we have a chance or opportunity to do as libertarians in this current moment. We need to have policies to be able to speak on the national stage, but let's talk about what's really possible for the Libertarian Party. And that is localism. That is decentralization. That is getting away from the federal government as much as possible. And nullification, nullifying.
I like Rechtenwald's focus on tactics, strategy, counter economics, I want to say, something like that. Well, he's focused on decentralization, but also the idea of finding a way to subvert the system, aside from simply education.
The unconstitutional laws, many of them having to do with this, and unconstitutional mandates that have been passed on to the states, and to go all the way to the local level, decentralize as far as possible. You know, in an ideal society, we'd live in a total private property society. There'd be no state at all. The only borders we would have would be the borders around your property. The only money that you would need would be self-defense, and you'd pay private agencies for that. That's really the ideal. So what we want to do is the closer we go down to the local level, the closer we get to that private property society.
Right. I want to follow up the question
All right, nice shout out to anarcho-capitalism.
just a little bit, push back just a little bit here, because
This field seems so much better than the last time I paid attention to a libertarian presidential race. I mean, just really strong across the board.
didn't hear a lot of what was going to be cut in the end. And just for an example, we have a $1.5 trillion deficit. In any realistic,
Repudiate.
rational world,
Anyone for repudiating the debt? Come on.
that's the first thing that has to be cut. So where would you find $1.5 trillion?
Well, I would cut all social welfare programs, Social Security, welfare.
I mean, I would have thought that would be the first thing he'd say.
Medicaid, Medicare. I would cut of course, the military-industrial complex would be utterly decimated, if not more. And we would bring all of these troops back from overseas, all of them from, 850 bases plus the secret one in Israel. We would bring all these troops back, and we would have to find out just what this state needs to offer.
Codename Site 512. There is, in fact, a secret U.S. radar base in Israel.
Operate at the minimalistic level. That is not determinable from this standpoint until we see what we can get rid of. And we should get rid of as many agencies as possible. They're nothing but oppressors. They don't serve us at all. The IRS is an oppressive agency.
Unfortunately, your time is up, but I do have a follow-up. Even if we cut the Department of Defense, and you used the term decimate, if we were to cut the Department of Defense 100%, completely eliminate the military and everything under it, you'd only get about halfway to cutting the deficit, let alone getting us to making real cuts.
No, he said HUD and social welfare and everything. You just weren't listening.
To the budget beyond that. Convince me that what you're suggesting is fiscally possible.
Well, you left out some of the other things that I said I would cut. It's all social welfare programs, all of them. And that's a huge part of the budget. So once that is gone, and the military industrial complex and its
That's basically all of it. You just left the bureaucracy. Once you the social welfare and the military, there's not much left.
contractors are cut to a bare minimum. And once you get rid of most of these agencies, the alphabet agencies, and once you get rid of a bulk of bureaucratic employees.
Plus, don't forget, you can auction off all the buildings and the equipment and the uniforms and everything. So that'll bring in a little revenue.
Employees that are nothing but deep state oppressors, then you're left with a much.
Plus, all these guys are gonna get jobs in the private sector, creating wealth, and it's gonna be win-win.
Smaller state, and this is what we want. We want the state to be shriveled to a naval-sized pit.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to
Love it. Love the imagery.
say that the national defense budget for the United States is $1.8 trillion a year. So it would.
That's incorrect. It's approximately $750 billion.
No, that's for the Department of Defense.
Okay.
So the official figures for how much is spent on the Department of Defense are not accurate. At least not according to monthlyreview.org, which, okay, it's blatant socialist propaganda, but still they claim the actual figure is more like 1.5 trillion. The balancemoney.com says for 2021 the figure is more like 933 billion. As opposed to the 636. So they say an estimate of about 50% more. And they add this up by tallying amounts spent on other government agencies like the Department, Homeland Security. In 2022, esteemed Republican or libertarian Robert Higgs showed that the Department of Defense claimed they spent about 16% of the budget, or 344 billion on national defense, Department of Defense. That's 2002. But in reality, they spent 596 billion when you look at Department of State, Department of Energy, Department of Veteran Affairs, Homeland Security, NASA. So some defense spending is channeled through these agencies. Then, of course, if you have an ongoing war, that money's funded through a special appropriation. And who can forget interest payments for debt that it was acquired from previous military ventures?
Okay, between the 6 subcomponents. Anyways, I would say I did have another. I just wanted to follow up that cutting 70% of the federal workforce would also go a long way to taking care of the deficit and reducing the budget as well. So,
I'm sorry, did you say cutting 70% of the
70% of the federal workforce, correct? Yes, all these agencies that we talk about abolishing that we wouldn't have the power to abolish, we do have the opportunity to lay off, mass layoffs in these federal agencies, including the IRS, the FBI, the CIA, the IRS, all of these big agencies. You do have the right and the power as a president for mass layoffs. So 87,000 IRS agents hired a couple years ago to
fire them all.
Harass middle-class dads on their taxes. Probably don't need to be in their positions anymore.
Mr. Hornberger.
Definitely don't.
I have a question for Michael. Michael, didn't you send out a tweet just before you recently became a member of the Libertarian Party in which you called a woman a dirtbag and came to the defense of Social Security, where they said that all Republicans want to cut Social Security, and you called her a dirtbag for wanting to cut? And
ooh, shots fired. You got to love the libertarian debate when the real scandal is that there's a guy who doesn't want to cut Social Security. Whereas, any Republican or Democratic debate, they're all, I would never cut Social Security. I would make sure the old people get all the welfare they want.
And that you came to the defense of Republicans and said, not all Republicans want to cut Social Security.
I have no idea. You'd have to bring the receipts on that. I have no idea what you're talking.
Let's bring the receipts. Well, I was unable to find it.
About. I have not been any kind of promoter of the Republican Party. Let me see.
You might forget, so I thought I'd bring the tweet.
100%.
I don't know. I see nothing here of incriminating whatsoever. I am talking about my policies, and this is what I have to say. First of all, this account was not always in my control, and I don't know whether it was in control at this time. But let me just say, not all Republicans, just the deep state dirtbags like Joni Ernst. Okay. Whatever. At some point, I may defend some things that some Republicans say, just like I actually defend some things that leftists say. I don't care what party they're in. I don't care where they stand on the political spectrum. If they're right about something, they're right. But this, I don't even know what the context is.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the question is, if we abolish Social Security and Medicare, what are you going to do for the people?
A new business. Most regulation that inhibits small businesses occurs at the state level. What specific changes do you propose at the federal level that can make a difference for entrepreneurs?
First, I do agree with you that most of these regulations do exist at the state level. And one thing a libertarian president would need to do is use the bully pulpit to try to push those at the state level. I can't control what governors and state legislatures do, but I can certainly advocate on their behalf to make it easier to start a job. The reason why I say I go line by line through the regulatory code is the regulatory code is gigantic. I can't tell you every single federal regulation that's in there that's inhibiting job growth, but I guarantee you there is an awful lot of them. But when we talk about why I want to go line by line, is because we should not be having fees or any kind of business licensure or anything at the federal level that makes it harder for somebody to start a brand new business. But
True.
These things are as inhibitors. And you're right. Again, most of this occurs at the state level. The example that I always use is when
Or barriers to entry, if you will.
I was in restaurants, I had to pay $35 a year for a beer pouring fee. I was not tested on whether I could pour beer correctly. It was merely a licensure for the state to collect money for me to be a server. And then there are examples of this in the federal code as well. In fact, licensures and things of that nature that we can reduce the cost of or eliminate altogether. But we do, and this is, like I like to say, is the most unsexy part of my entire platform, because going line by line through the IRS tax code and the regulatory codes is a very cumbersome task, and it's not one that one person can do altogether. But I can tell you right now, Americans all across the country want to make it easier to start a small business, and eliminating some of these things like licensures and fees